Why do we have so many problems? Why aren't we solving our problems? And how do we solve our problems? Hi, I'm John Rose. Welcome to my YouTube channel. If you've watched any of my other videos, you know that's the whole idea behind my YouTube channel. In fact, I produced an 11-part video series several years ago when I really got into uploading videos on YouTube. And I called it The Ultimate Solution. And I gave the definitive answer to those three questions. But I made it an 11-part video series. I didn't really give the actual definitive answer until part 3. I sort of set it up because I use a special teaching tool to help explain my story. And the last 8 parts of that 11-part video series explains all of the pieces to the puzzle for those who want to know. And now for you guys in the future, if I don't ever discuss something in more detail and you wonder what I'm talking about, go back to that very first video where I have all 11 parts and you look at the index of every one of them and you can see what I talk about in each one of those videos, where I talk about whether it's the 5 mistakes we're making or whatever, the 3 ways to correct 5 mistakes. A lot of times I don't explain everything in every video. But today I want to revisit those 3 questions, and I'm going to answer them in a much different way today, because I was very vague in the beginning with that video. You really didn't even understand what I meant when I was referring to a solid food vacation. All I was saying is that let's modify what used to be the best preparation for a better way of life, and even at that point you didn't even know I was talking about water fasting. I was vague for a reason. Most people just shut their frontal lobe off when they hear something they don't want to entertain. So I tried to make sure you didn't even know I was talking about food for the longest time, because that's what it takes for most people to say, I don't want to hear anymore. I like what I eat, right? We all got to die of something. I got to enjoy my life. Little do they know life is an illusion, because there's a very simple solution to all of our problems. And there's a very simple reason why we're making mistakes. The reason why we're not solving our problems gets a little more complicated. But let's start with the very first question. Why do we have so many problems? The very simple answer to that question is we're making mistakes. We're not satisfying our needs, especially our food. That's the biggest of all the mistakes we're making. And why aren't we solving our problems? It's because of ignorance. We don't know that. We really don't have knowledge of how to live. We don't have knowledge of our 12 essential needs and our 2 additional temporary needs, meaning that there are 2 groups of needs we must satisfy, which will be the ultimate answer for the third question: how do we solve our problems? We have to satisfy these 2 groups of needs. So let's go back to that first question one more time. Why do we have so many problems? We're making 5 main mistakes based on 5 things we mastered, and then we applied them to our food. We altered our food. It made our food unnatural. Now, what are those 5 mistakes I talk about all the time? Well, let's work in reverse. The 5th thing we mastered, which would be the 5th bad application we could make, was the chemical revolution in the 1940s. We started growing our food on artificial fertilizer and spraying them with pesticides. The net result is we lose 83% of the most important nutrient that we need in our food. It's called a biophoton. And yeah, if you've ever watched any of my other videos, I talk about that all the time, don't I? Because it's the number one reason why we shouldn't make the very first mistake, which I'll get to in a moment. The 5th mistake, we don't want to eat conventional food. And you may not think you are, but if you're eating at McDonald's and if you're eating the regular, your meat isn't organic, then that animal's food isn't organic. You can't be growing food on artificial fertilizer and using pesticides. Chemicals should not enter into this food equation whatsoever. That's the 5th mistake. And we lose 83% of those biophotons, meaning that organic food has 5 times the biophotons as conventional produce. Come out here into the wild, now we got twice that of organic, and that's how all of our food should be grown. Working backwards, the 4th mistake comes from the 4th thing we mastered. That's the Industrial Revolution. And that's when we started processing our foods. And my gosh, it's such a huge mistake that if every person on this planet, especially in industrialized societies, stopped eating processed foods, their health would increase dramatically. It's one of the biggest mistakes we're making. Now, the third mistake traces back to the agricultural revolution. And that's when we started eating plants that were not biologically adapted to eat. And the only way we could eat them is if we processed them, like in cooking, for example. Because when you cook a food that doesn't want you to eat it, it has anti-nutrients in it for a reason. But if you kill the food, you kill the anti-nutrients. And now you can not suffer from having those anti-nutrients, but then you suffer from eating the dead food because it's been cooked, which goes to the first mistake. But prior to that were the animals. We don't have the anatomy to eat animals. There's not one anatomical characteristic that we have that tells us we should be eating any animals. And if you think you can't get strong and perform well on a plant-based diet, watch The Game Changers. It just premiered recently here in Houston. I heard it premiered recently somewhere else on October 1st, where they show that athletes perform better when you don't eat animals because you get more oxygen to your blood. You live longer. You have less disease. But yet, this whole planet revolves around sickness, so the status quo is going to make sure you don't understand this message, and there's going to be a lot of conflicting information about that second big mistake we made. When we start eating animals, we're not biologically adapted to eat because we don't have the anatomy. We have anatomical limitations. Same thing goes with a lot of plant foods. We can't break the cellulose down in broccoli and cauliflower. We really shouldn't be eating those raw. We could juice them and then process it that way. So there are good applications to these things we mastered. But then there are bad applications. And the worst application of all is that very first mistake we made, where we were foolish enough to put our food in the fire. And I say foolish because it's sorcery, so to speak. It's magic. When we alter our food with fire, it creates all of these new colors and aromas and flavors that never existed before. And it puts us under a spell. Not to mention it's unnatural. And now we perceive our withdrawal symptoms from eating those foods as hunger, and we think that's our problem, or we're hungry. I've got this all-gone feeling in my stomach. That's a withdrawal symptom because you're eating unnatural foods. We took something we mastered and we applied it to our food. Fire, animals, certain types of plants, processing our foods, using those chemicals. 5 main mistakes is the reason why we have so many problems. And one of the biggest problems with such a simple solution like that most people think, that's impossible. You know, I'm making those mistakes and I've got this problem. My husband's making those mistakes and he's got this problem. What's going on? Well, that's where it gets a little confusing, doesn't it? Because those 5 main mistakes are literally causing hundreds of thousands of symptoms. We all can't manifest them all, do we? It's no different than taking a drug. Most of y'all should know by now. If you ever watch any TV at all, my God, it's frightening to hear these drug commercials on TV where they go through the side effects and just now speak of them nonchalantly like, oh, no big deal. And you hear that the side effects like, oh my, you got to be kidding. Death, suicide, homicide. You're kidding. Those are side effects. But the key here is that not everyone's going to manifest those side effects. 10% might manifest that one and 10% manifest that one, just like I'm making 5 mistakes and now I've got diabetes, my wife has asthma. Same 5 mistakes. A simple solution. How can it be so simple? It has to be. We're talking about the solution to most of our problems. It's profound. Anything profound has to be simple. But we got a lot of obstacles in our way, right? Why do we have so many problems? What is wrong with us? We're making mistakes. And why are we doing that? Ignorance. Most of us are doing things we think are okay, but they're not okay. And why is that? Well, I've thought about this a lot. I've come up with 21 main problems of knowledge. Socrates said long ago, the problem of knowledge is the key to all of our problems. I got real excited because I already had my list of problems of knowledge back when I heard that. I've been working on that list for a long time. 21 main problems of knowledge. 55 total altogether. Because those problems of knowledge don't only keep us from finding the knowledge we need, but they can keep us from applying it too. But they can also facilitate that process. Because we can take one of those obstacles, for example, bad habit, and create a good habit. So, what is the number one problem of knowledge? We don't have the knowledge of how to live. We don't understand that we have 12 essential needs. Air, water, and food is the first three. Something's crawling on me. Sunshine, exercise, and sleep would be the next three. Our thoughts, our feelings, our emotions, and what I like to call community, some people call spirituality or religion. Then, of the next three, the big one is the environment. In fact, it starts with our environment. That's our external metabolism. And then we interact with our environment, and we are in the environment. So there are 11 ways that we do that. Got 2 more to go. We have to procreate, and then we have to be free of things that are outside of our control and that don't belong inside of us, which is a really big umbrella piece I put in there to cover a lot of pieces. But those are 12 essential needs, and we don't have the knowledge of how to live. The number one problem is knowledge. But the biggest one is we don't have knowledge of our food. Our food has to be natural, and it's not. Why? Because we're making 5 bad applications to our food based on 5 things we mastered. So that's the number one problem, knowledge. And the number one reason why we can't find that knowledge, because we have false knowledge in its place. We cannot learn anything when we think we already know. So those are 2 forms of ignorance right there that are getting us in trouble. There's lost knowledge or hidden knowledge that's been hidden from us in our traditions. And then there's that false knowledge we have in its place. And then there are 19 obstacles or 19 reasons why we don't know we don't know. 12 of those are sources of false knowledge, and the other 7 are willingness factors. The number one source for false knowledge would be the dark side of our behavior. It's what happens when we make these 5 mistakes. As I mentioned, when we make that 5th mistake, we lose 83% of those biophotons, which is the sunlight energy that helps us feel our 6th sense. But the biggest problem is cooking our food destroys the food. It's no longer living. And only living systems can store sunlight energy in the nucleus of their cells. So when we stop cooking our food, we stop eating those biophotons by 100%. That's why we suffer so much. That's the biggest problem knowledge we have when it comes to sources of false knowledge, because when something like the game changers come out, that's part of controlled opposition. The urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it. H.L. Mencken, he understood what was going on. Lenin said the best way to control the opposition is to lead it ourselves. So when they come out with something like the game changers, they already have a bunch of opposition that they just had a study recently saying, oh, we did this, do a new study, confirms it's okay to eat animal, eat meat, even red meat, and even processed meat. And these are all lies. And in fact, the Physicians Committee of Responsible Medicine has already filed a lawsuit against these guys for coming out and lying, when it totally goes against what we know to be true, that second mistake we're making is a mistake. We're not meant to be eating animals, period. And yet you're going to find people who say, look, there's 5 mistakes we're making. I'm going to still make the first 2 mistakes. And look, I'm better than ever. I'm eating animals. You don't know what you're talking about, John. No, you still are making 2 mistakes. You're still mostly cooking your food. And a lot of you guys are raw, eating the raw meat and raw animals. We don't need to eat those. There's nothing in those that you can't find inside of a plant, unless you're damaged somehow, you're not making a level 2 nutrient. Or the society's damaged somehow, and we're not getting the B12 we should because of the chemical revolution, or we might be living in an area that's too far up north and we're not getting the vitamin D like I am right now. Why do you think I'm out here without a shirt? This is October 5th right now. I'm not going to be able to get as much sun like this for the rest of the year, so I got to store up on my vitamin D. That's why one of the main reasons why I don't wear a shirt when I come out here. Also, clothes weaken the skin. My skin and your skin is the number one defense against everything on this planet. You want to have a strong skin. And because I don't wear clothes, it's very often even indoors, in the summertime when it's 100 degrees outside, 100% humidity, I can be comfortable at 85 degrees inside. So because I don't weaken my skin, I can handle temperature changes better. And we know the benefits of exercising in cold weather. I did a video especially on talking about brown fat. Many of you guys are Wim Hof fans. Same concept. Brown fat's important to understand. I did, again, a video on that. I'll put links down below. So, those are the first 3 problems of knowledge right there we have to be aware of. And I did, one of my favorite videos is Escaping the Matrix of Evil. Please watch that video. I used 4 different allegories that explain that they all use those 3 main pieces as part of their story. Plato's Cave uses it. The Matrix uses it, which is based on Plato's Cave. There's also a group of Muslims called the 5 Percenters. They use it. And there's another group that came up with our ship, Socrates Dances in Heaven. And they all point out that those are the three main pieces. We don't have the knowledge of how to live. That's why we have so many problems. And then, why aren't we solving our problems? It's that ignorance. We don't know. That's that false knowledge we have in its place. And then why do we have those two forms of ignorance? Well, there's 19 reasons. 12 source of false knowledge. The number one source of false knowledge, labeled piece number 3 because it's so important. It's the darkness of the dark side of our behavior. Why do we have that? Because of these 5 mistakes. Fifth mistake, we lose the biophotons 83%. The first mistake, we lose them by 100%. Again, the biophotons, that's our 6th sense. We're supposed to have 6 senses, folks, not 5. It's why we have a dark side of our behavior. It's a contributing factor. The other contributing factor is because of, all ties back to that first mistake too, because now we're making those other 4 mistakes, we're eating food that has the slow bowel transit time. And as a result, we have a serpent inside of our belly, a cesspool. So those are 2 huge contributing factors to the dark side of our behavior. And again, that's the number one reason why we still don't know. And then piece number 4 is an important piece because that's our traditions. We start our journey off in life on the wrong path, being told lies by our parents. They're teaching us the same mistakes that we're taught to them. They had no idea, and we don't know. How else would we know? We grow up being taught their mistakes. We go out into the real world. Everywhere we go, everyone else is making the same mistakes, pretty much, right? We're not aware of it. So there are 7 wellness factors in addition to some of those sources of false knowledge I just mentioned. If you want to know more about those, check out the Ultimate Schematic and the Ultimate Solution 11-part video series. In fact, with my 11-part video series, I included one of the videos on the Ultimate Schematic at the end of that. I've done some other updates on the Ultimate Schematic to help you understand how that tool works. Because there's a simple solution, folks, to solve our problems. We've got these 2 groups of needs that we have to satisfy. And we have to look at both of these groups as horses that are pulling us. We're like a chariot being pulled by a bunch of horses. 12 of those horses has to do with those 12 essential needs, but then we have these 2 additional temporary needs. One of them has to do with subsequent needs because we're sick and disconnected. We don't have enough biophotons in us. We've got too much crap inside of us. Now we have this dark side to our behavior. And because of that, we've got 10 needs we didn't have before. We got the wrong mentality, folks. We shouldn't have an exchange mentality where now we need money. We should have a gift mentality. So everything's backwards. But when it comes to solving our problems, these are obviously obstacles for some of us. In fact, I identified 6 of those 10 subsequent needs as problems of knowledge. I explained that in my 11-part video series. But the other one that's important to understand when it comes to these 2 additional temporary needs is we have subsequent causes that don't go away just because we remove the primary causes. In other words, we can change what we do overnight. If you've been banging your head up against a wall every day, day after day, we can stop that overnight. We can remove the primary cause. But the subsequent cause, that big knot we might still have on our head, might not go away right away. And that's where this other group of needs really comes into play. And it has to do with those horses that are pulling our chariot. We've got those 12 essential needs that are pulling our chariot. You got to identify all the weak ones. If you're not sleeping, you got a weak sleep horse out there. You need to be aware of it. If you're not exercising, your exercise horse is weak. But then you've got that other group of needs that is also part of those horses that we have to be aware of. And that is, how have we been damaged individually? Some of it could have been through genetic defects or simply mainly just genetic weaknesses, which is what gets most of us in trouble, and will determine usually why one person will have asthma versus another person have diabetes. That's sort of the uniqueness of disease. So there's a oneness of disease that has to do with these 12 essential needs, but then there's a uniqueness of disease that comes into play because of how we've been damaged individually. And that's, again, our job. We have to identify all those horses that are pulling us and find out the weak ones. Find out how we're damaged. Support your body if you have to on a temporary basis. And this is where the true art of healing comes into play. Because if you keep giving your body something it's supposed to produce, if it's a level 2 nutrient, the body can atrophy. So there is indeed an art and a role that you play in figuring all this out. You've got to learn how your body works. The best way to truly understand how your body works is to take a solid food vacation. Remember, there's only one thing we really have to do, folks, and that is to satisfy two groups of needs, but most of us aren't willing and able to do it. That's why I added those two preliminary steps. The first step addresses the willingness issue on a temporary basis. That's where we take a solid food vacation on juices for the appropriate length of time so we can see what we're missing, so we can correct those 5 main mistakes on a temporary basis. And then be in a better position to say, okay, now I'll take the second step and I'll correct those 5 mistakes on a permanent basis with an understanding that while I'm working those first 2 steps, I always got to do the third step because that's the only thing we have to do. Satisfy both these groups of needs. That's it. The only problem is that if we look at how to correct those 5 mistakes, there are 3 main ways to do so, 2 of which most people aren't willing to do to get enough people's attention. That's why I'm convinced the solid food vacation on juices is an idea as time has come. Because we can get enough people to correct these 5 mistakes on a temporary basis so they can see what they're missing and then be in a better position to do the other 2 things that you can do to correct those 5 mistakes, which would include a solid food vacation on water as well as simply a raw vegan diet. When you eat a raw vegan diet, you're not making the first mistake, you're not cooking your foods, you're not making a second mistake, right? You're not eating animals. You're not eating the third mistake because the plants that we're not supposed to eat have to be cooked to be eaten unless we process them in another way. And again, we got to think twice about whether or not we should eat something if we have to process it. Although we can sprout things and make them edible and they're not going to be in the same boat as they would have been had we left them there or we had cooked them. But we definitely got to stop those last 2 mistakes where we're processing the foods and using chemicals, the artificial fertilizers and the pesticides and food colorings and additives. It's insane what we do to our food. Because that's the simple solution, folks. We are what we eat. When we look at all of these needs, the one that stands out the most is our food. It's not a panacea, as you can see. There's 11 other essential needs that we have, and there are these other additional temporary needs that can get in our way. For some of us, economics is huge. Money is huge. Our need for money can make this journey very difficult for some of us, especially in third world countries. That's why it's up to us in places where we can pull this off to do our job, to help us reach the tipping point. Because things aren't going to change. There's only one way to actually solve all of our problems. And that is for us to reach the tipping point. It's not enough for you to just go out there and play your role by doing it. We've got to join the hero's journey, share this message, get us to the tipping point. Because things aren't going to change. We'll never solve all these other problems where we have limited control, like acts of war, crime, and violence, for example, until we reach the tipping point. We can still be a victim of someone else's mistakes. And the only solution is for us to reach a tipping point so that we all correct these mistakes, and then we won't be going around doing stupid things like we are now. As it is, the average person's got a pretty good reason for doing stupid things. My God, we live in a sick world. We've got a bunch of crap inside of our intestines, surrounding our cells. Don't have enough of that sunlight energy inside of our cells to communicate to everything and feel one with everything, to make us realize there's only one way to improve our lives, and that's to make everything around us better. That's the reality we've got to come up to. That's the ultimate solution right there to solve all of our problems. We got to start eating our biophotons. That's the ultimate solution. How do we solve the vast majority of the problems on this planet? We get enough people to start eating enough biophotons to get everyone else's attention. Then that will help us reach the majority in no time flat. Then we'll figure out what we're going to have to do with those people who are struggling, whether they lack the ability or the willpower. We'll figure out the best way to help them. And of course, by that time, it'll be a no-brainer. Everyone will realize the transformation this planet is going through by correcting one simple mistake, the very first mistake we ever made, the cooking of our food, the destroying of one of our senses. Simple, simple, simple. I've got a 32 video playlist on how to take a solid food vacation. 2-hour seminar with other videos that back it up, because my seminars normally last 4 hours. Other videos you need to pay attention to if you're new to my channel. Watch What is the Healthiest Diet for Humans. It's a very long video, but I explain how those horses work in more detail. I explain how we have 10 body systems I explain the cause of disease and the disease process, which is a bodily process. And we need to understand not to interfere with it, but instead how to cooperate with it and help facilitate that. Another great video I think many of you people need to see if you haven't seen it yet is that amazing interview with Norman Dodd. He was the chief investigator for the Reese Committee back in the 1950s. They looked at the tax-exempt corporations, Rockefeller Foundation and Carnegie Endowment, had access to their minutes, and they were very blatant about what they were doing. They were trying to get historians to lie about the war so that they could control history, so they could have it repeat itself. And they realized they wouldn't lie for them, so they went out and said, well, we're going to have to control what we teach historians. We're going to create a new stable of historians. It's a very long interview, and it's pretty dry in some areas. But go to that video and look at my pinned comment. I recap the part you need to hear about. He comes right out and says that this is what they said. We have to create a new stable of historians. We've got to get 20 new PhD candidates out there that we know are going to be nice little bitty sheep, and we'll do what we tell them because we're going to get them to enroll in our program. They got to qualify. Do you have the right kind of mindset that you're easily manipulated and you won't buck the system? You'll tell everybody what we tell you. You'll believe in it. And that's what they did. And I know I've got a sister-in-law's twin sister fits in that category. 4.0 PhD, wrote a history books on the Vietnam War. I bet she doesn't even understand the truth about the Gulf of Tonkin to this day, because she was a useful idiot, totally unaware that she was being used to manipulate people. And the reason why I bring up the Norman Dodd interview is because once you understand that these people have the power to control the educational systems in history, you realize they have that same power to do it in medicine and nutrition. And a lot of you guys have already figured that out once you realize when you change what you eat, that our medical system is a joke. They have no idea about how food enters into the picture. And even people with PhDs in nutrition don't understand this. They don't see the disease connection. I explain that in What is the Healthiest Diet for Humans. Please watch that video. Please watch the Norman Dodd interview, very long video, pretty dry, but at least look at the pinned comment down there. Check out my seminar. If you're not motivated enough, be sure to watch the Dr. Roba interview or listen to it. It's a radio interview I uploaded. He's on day 21 of a solid food vacation. You can hear the excitement in his voice. Lost 20 pounds in the first 3 weeks. Medical miracle. No more backache, no more headache. Cholesterol dropped 100 points. Blood pressure was high. Now it's normal. Watch the Deborah Duncan show if you need more motivation. Watch people get rid of varicose veins and bunions and gouts, fibromyalgia. Start winning every race instead of finishing mid-pack. That's what the Game Changer is all about. That's what happened to me. That's what got me onto this journey. And one thing led to the next. And that's what you want to do, folks. Keep on the hero's journey. You got to keep going out there, gathering knowledge and data so you can be a better hero, so you can tell this message and share the simple truth that we are the heroes. We are the solution. The solution is simple. It's a bottom-up solution. And it's not going to work unless enough people do it. And most people aren't going to understand it until they test an idea as time has come. And you know when they test an idea as time has come, what happens to them, right? Yoo-hoo! They're in for a treat.